Many of us have flown and heard the safety lecture at the beginning of commercial flights. Some of us have actually read the safety cards that are now pretty much universally available on those flights. In the early 1970s, the world of commercial aviation was not as safe as it is now. Even then, it was popularly said that it was safer to fly than to cross the street or drive a car, and it was. However, as long as aircraft fly, there will be incidents and accidents. And in today's episode, we'll explore 3 amazing survival stories of aircraft that crashed but left survivors to tell the story. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Me, Myself, and I History, where strange history and weird happenings in the universe are always on the menu. My name is Seraphim. My mother tells me that my first flight was when I was a mere 3 weeks old. They almost didn't let her on the plane in that late March morning in 1971 because of my tiny size. They were afraid I would be injured during takeoff or landing, or possibly by turbulent weather we might encounter. My mother talked them into it, and we flew from Helena, Montana to Kansas City, Missouri, where I grew up. Just a few months later, I was on another flight, this time a round trip from Kansas City to Austin, Texas. Apparently, it grew on me even then. I love flying to this day, and I have logged many flight miles since. On only 2 flights have I encountered anything beyond the ordinary and expected, and neither flight resulted in an emergency. Today, we will share the stories of 3 flights that did experience emergencies and how the harrowing conditions led to amazing survival stories. Without further ado, let's get on with those stories. The Peruvian Jungle. Juliane Koepcke's parents were college sweethearts at the University of Kiel in Germany. Her father had a doctorate in natural sciences from Kiel University in 1947, and her mother earned hers in ornithology in 1949. Juliane was born in 1954 in Lima, Peru, where her parents married just 4 years earlier. Her parents were involved in the research and cooperation with the Natural History Museum in Lima. She left Lima with her parents at the age of 14 to establish the Panguana Research Station in the Amazonian rainforest on the eastern front of the Andes Mountains in the foothills of the El Sierra mountain range. There she learned survival skills and scientific lessons from her parents. The educational authorities in Peru were not impressed, and at 17 she had to return to Lima, and there she attended the Lima Alexander von Humboldt German School. There she graduated in December 1970. She and her mother were supposed to fly back to Pucallpa and meet up with her father for Christmas on the 19th or 20th of December, but Juliane insisted on staying in Lima so that she could walk with her graduating class's commencement ceremony on the 23 December. Her mother gave in. That meant the next day, on Christmas Eve, they had to fly out if they wanted to meet up for Christmas. There was just 1 set of tickets left on any airline that would get them home on time. LANSA Airlines, however, had a poor reputation and was down to just a single Lockheed L-188 Electra aircraft. Her father tried hard to talk them out of taking this flight. It was better to miss Christmas, he insisted, but her mother wouldn't hear it. LANSA Flight 508 took off just before noon from Jorge Chavez International Airport, headed to Iquitos, with a stop in Pucallpa where Juliane and her mother would get off. Only they didn't make it. Pressured to meet a demanding holiday schedule by their superiors, the flight crew decided to press on into a dangerous weather system. The Peruvian authorities cited this as the primary reason for the crash in their investigation. Flying at 21,000 feet or 6,400 meters, which is very near the service ceiling of the L-188 aircraft, they flew into a thunderstorm with dangerous turbulence coming down off of the Andes. Lightning struck the aircraft, and it broke apart in flight. As many as 14 passengers could possibly have survived the crash, only to die awaiting rescue. Juliane's mother was among them. Juliane was not. Juliane was, apparently, the only occupant of her 3-seat row on the starboard side of the aircraft. When the aircraft disintegrated, her seat row was thrown from the aircraft and she began to fall, strapped into her window seat. It is speculative, but it is believed that the seat row, with her buckled into the seat, acted as a parachute or a helicopter, significantly slowing her descent. There may have been updrafts reducing her speed too. She landed in the jungle with the overstory and then the understory additionally arresting her impact speed. When Juliane came to, she had a broken collarbone, a serious gash in her right arm, one eye swollen shut and the other eye swollen to a slit. She also had a concussion. Using the survival skills she learned, she began walking in a creek that led to a river, which she then followed. Sooner or later, a river will almost always lead to a settlement of some kind. She suffered severe insect bites, and she got an infestation of botfly larvae on the arm wound. After 9 days, she located a hut that was used as an encampment for local lumberjacks. She went in and collapsed on a bed. She was found there when the lumberjacks returned for the evening. They poured gasoline on her arm wound to kill the botflies and prevent further infections. Then they put her in a canoe for an 11-hour journey to the nearest aid station, from where she was airlifted to a hospital. After she recovered sufficiently, she helped in the search for the rest of the aircraft. It and her mother's remains were found on 12 January 1972. In a bit of irony, if she had traveled south-southeast, she might have found the Penguana Research Station, but we give her credit for not knowing where she was. Juliane soon returned to her parents' native Germany to fully heal up. She eventually attended Kiel University herself and earned a PhD in mammalogy, specializing in the study of bats. She took over her father's research station after he retired. She also wrote a book about her experiences whose English title is When I Fell from the Sky. Vesna Vulovic was born on 3 January 1950 in Belgrade, in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Her father was a businessman and her mother was a fitness instructor. Yugoslavia was not as closed off as the rest of the European communist bloc, and people there had some access to Western goods. As a result, Vesna grew up loving the Beatles' music. It inspired her to attend university in the UK in order to strengthen her English skills. She really wanted to live in London, but wound up in Newbury, where a friend suggested that they move to Stockholm instead. She did. And when she called home to tell her parents of the new residence, they thought she was involved in the free sex and drug scene and demanded that she come home right away. And she did. Once she was home, she saw a friend who had become a flight attendant in her uniform and decided that she wanted to be a flight attendant as well. She figured she could go to London once a month that way. She joined Yugoslavia's national air carrier, Jugoslavenski Aerotransport, or YAT for short. Soon she was flying around Europe regularly. One time she was confused for another flight attendant of the same name and was put on a flight to Copenhagen. She was excited because she'd never been there before, and after she arrived, she had the whole afternoon, evening, and the following morning to do what she liked. She wanted to go sightseeing, but her colleagues wanted to go shopping instead. She later said in an interview that it was like everyone on the crew knew they were going to die or something. The flight from Stockholm to Copenhagen was delayed, so all the replacement flight crew, including Vesna, were at the boarding gate when it pulled in. All of them noticed a very serious-looking man coming off the plane. He looked nervous and eager to get out of there. They all noted it, but decided not to make much of it. Soon the DC-9-32 plane was airborne and flying over the German-Czechoslovak border when a bomb in the luggage compartment blew the plane apart. As the plane explosively depressurized, the 27 other passengers and crew were sucked out of the plane and fell to their deaths. The remains of the aircraft crashed to the ground near Srbska Kamenica, Czechoslovakia, in the modern-day Czech Republic. Vesna was pinned down by a food service cart at the back of the plane. As the tail section came down, authorities believe it came at an angle, making it possible for Vesna to survive. Vesna was unconscious for a time. A local villager, Bruno Hanka, had found her screaming in the wreckage. Her turquoise uniform was bloodied, and her 3-inch stiletto heels had been ripped off of her feet by the impact. Hanka had been a combat medic in World War II, and that knowledge and experience helped him keep her alive until rescuers arrived. Vesna soon fell into a coma that lasted 27 days. She was temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. She had a history of low blood pressure, and physicians believed that this is what caused her to pass out quickly during the depressurization and kept her heart from bursting on impact. She had a broken skull and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. Both legs were broken, several ribs, her pelvis, and 3 vertebrae, one of which was completely crushed. She had amnesia from 1 hour before the explosion until a month later. She said that her last memory was greeting passengers as they boarded. 2 weeks after she awakened from the coma, she was shown a newspaper with the story of the crash. She fainted and later had to be tranquilized because of it. In March 1972, she was flown to Belgrade to complete her recovery. She did not fear flying as she had no memory of the crash. Because it was thought that Croatian nationalists who were responsible for the bomb might want her dead, she was placed under 24-hour guard in the hospital. She eventually made a near-total recovery. Her spine was twisted, causing her to walk with a pronounced limp the rest of her life, but she was otherwise fine and flew frequently. She offered to resume her flight attendant position, but Yacht thought it would be unwise and her celebrity would only attract undue attention during flights. She was given a desk job negotiating air cargo contracts. She was widely recognized as a heroine all the way through the Warsaw Pact and even into the Soviet Union. Yugoslav President Josip Tito honored her, as did Serbian folk singer Miroslav Ilić. The people of Srpska Kamenica made her an honorary citizen of their village. Hanka, the combat medic that found her, named his granddaughter, who was born just 6 weeks later, after her. So, how far was her fall? According to the Guinness Book of World Records, she fell 10,160 meters, or 33,338 feet. Translated into larger units of measure, that's 6.31 miles, or 10.16 kilometers. That record stands today. Her body was found on 23 December 2016 after she failed to answer her phone repeatedly. A locksmith had been called to force the door to her apartment. She had died of heart disease, with which she had been struggling for many years. It was just days short of her 67th birthday. The third and final event in our episode today was depicted in the 1993 movie Alive. Some of my listeners may remember that movie. I was a student in a Utah Votech school when it came out, and a buddy and I got to go watch it in the campus theater for free. It depicts the survival of members of the Old Christian Club rugby union team, as well as some of their family and friends. They chartered a flight in a Bolivian Air Force Fairchild Hiller FH-227, a twin turboprop passenger aircraft with room for 40 passengers and 5 crew. They were intending to fly from Montevideo, Bolivia to Santiago, Chile for a rugby match. In command of the aircraft was Colonel Julio Cesar Ferradas, a very experienced pilot with more than 5,000 flight hours under his belt. His co-pilot was the inexperienced Lieutenant Colonel Dante Hector Lagarara. Ferradas was to train Lagarara how to safely fly over the Andes. Ferradas had flown this same route 29 times previously. The FH-227 was a variant of the license-built Fairchild F-27, which in turn was based on the Fokker F-27 Friendship passenger plane, which first flew in 1955. The F-27 and its Fairchild license-built version suffered from some poor handling characteristics. A poor center of gravity made it tail-heavy. It was also a bit heavy for the power provided by its Rolls-Royce Dart turboprop engines. To counter this tail-heavy tendency, the forward fuselage on the FH-227 was extended by 6 feet or 1.83 meters, making it heavier, but without more powerful engines being used to compensate. Because the type was underpowered for its intended purpose, it was nicknamed by English-speaking crews as the lead sled. Of the type, 206 were built. 23 of them were lost to crashes, making it one of the less safe aircraft of the period. Flight 571 took off on 12 October 1972 from Carrasco International Airport in Montevideo, Bolivia. A storm system over the Andes forced the aircraft to land in Mendoza, Argentina for the night and wait out the storms. Although there is a direct route from Mendoza to Santiago, it flies past Mount Aconcagua, the highest peak in the Western Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere alike. With a service ceiling of only 28,000 feet or 8,500 meters, the FH-227 would have a difficult and very turbulent path if they took that route. It would be near impossible in the weather conditions present at the time. They determined to use the more normative path. The path was a horseshoe-shaped route south from Mendoza, across the Andes, and then north to Santiago. It was only a 90-minute flight plan, and it was far safer, especially for an aircraft like the lead sled that was near its maximum takeoff weight and would be fairly unresponsive to sudden changes in the controls. Due to heavy cloud cover, the flight was required to fly by instrument meteorological rules. That is, by instruments alone, taking into account things like time, altitude, direction, speed, etc. Still flying on instruments, co-pilot and trainee Lieutenant Colonel Lagarara radioed that he was at 18,000 feet or 5,500 meters and would be overflying Curico radio beacon in about a minute and requested permission to begin the descent into Santiago. He did not see that his radio navigation system said Curico was still around 43 miles or 69 kilometers west of him when he began to turn north. Being out of radar coverage, the air traffic controllers in Santiago gave permission to drop to 11,500 feet or 3,505 meters altitude without knowing that the flight was still over the Andes. As the aircraft descended, it dropped below the clouds and was experiencing severe turbulence. It was probably at this point when the passengers noticed they were flying extremely close to the mountains. It was also this point when the pilots noticed the ridge ahead of them. Immediately going to full throttle and pulling back on the yoke, they attempted to bring the aircraft over the 13,800 foot or 4,206 meter ridge. The aircraft contacted the mountain 2 or 3 times before the nose of the plane crested the ridge, but with the tail clipped off the fuselage at this point. The next collision removed the starboard wing from the aircraft, which was thrown violently enough to clip the tail cone itself off the aircraft. Another outcropping at the 14,400 foot or 4,389 meter height broke the port wing off the plane, sending the propeller through part of the fuselage, and 2 passengers fell out the gaping hole in the back. What remained of the aircraft careened down the next slope of the glacier at 220 miles per hour or 354 kilometers per hour until it crashed into a snowbank, coming to a violent stop. It was near the top of the Glaciar de las Lágrimas, or the Glacier of Tears. Of the crew, only the co-pilot remained alive. He begged the survivors to find his pistol and shoot him, but they refused. He died of his injuries the next day. 33 passengers survived the crash. 5 more died the first night. 1 more would die after an avalanche asphyxiated him as he attempted to go down the mountain. The search and rescue aircraft overflew the area 3 times in the next days, but could not see the white aircraft against the white snow of the glacier. There was not enough lipstick to make an SOS on the top of the fuselage, and the cross made from luggage was not spotted either. After 142 hours of searching, the search was called off, and plans were made to resume the search in December after the majority of the snows had melted off for the summer in order to locate the bodies and repatriate them for burial. A number of techniques were used to survive. Chairs and snow were used to seal off the aft of the cabin. A solar water collector was made from some sheet metal. Sunglasses were made from the sun visors in the cockpit and were fashioned with bra straps that were held to them with wire to prevent snow blindness in those working outside the fuselage remains. Almost no food was found in the wreckage or luggage, and it soon ran out. Some resorted to eating the cotton stuffing in the seats or the leather from belts or boots. This made them sick. Eventually, they resorted to cannibalism of the dead to stay alive. It was decided that the 3 healthiest survivors would go on an expedition for help. For a week, they waited for warmer weather, were given more to eat, and excused from chores to strengthen them for the journey. When they left, they were given extra clothes to help them survive the overnight exposure. They found the tail section the next day, with the galley section intact. There was some food aboard and other comfort items. The aircraft batteries were intact too. They returned to the main crash site to harvest the radio to bring it to the batteries and then call for help. They did not know that the radio required 115-volt power, and they had only 24-volt power from the batteries. After a couple of days of trying to get it to work, they gave up. They also soon realized that the only way out of their position was to climb the rim to the west of the crash site and to find their way into Chile. They fashioned a communal sleeping bag and headed west on day 61 of the ordeal. On day 64, one of the trekkers returned to the fuselage, too exhausted to keep going. On day 69, 8 days into the trek, the two remaining trekkers made contact with a Chilean muleteer who was eventually able to give them some food and give them a ride to a nearby town. The Chilean army was contacted and a 2-day rescue operation commenced, rescuing the 14 remaining survivors still alive on the glacier and the bodies of those who did not make it. This grueling ordeal lasted 72 days and it made headlines around the world. It has since been made the subject of several books, including 2 by survivors, 4 documentaries, 2 theater productions, and 3 feature films. Today's stories all have one thing in common. People survived what should have been unsurvivable. Each of these, in its own way, is a story of determination and a will to live and not give up, and not a little bit of the grace of God on top of it all. If you liked this episode, please hit that like and subscribe button, hit that notification bell to be alerted to more great content from this channel, and then tell your friends and family who like weird history and unusual stories. Drop a comment if you have anything to add to these stories or just want to express your thoughts. Until next time, my friends, this is Seraphim with Me, Myself, and I History signing off.